352, Grayson Grundhoefer, 365 Sports, Sic'Em365.com, does many things, including football analyst and recruiting coordinator.
Well, Grayson, today was the last availability that we got with Baylor before they start their regular season stuff. So next week there'll be no availability and from what you've seen when you were here, from what you've gathered, how much do you think this team will be different than the one we saw last year on the field before they've even taken a snap?
I mean, I think the initial hope is that at least, from last year to this year, those kind of locker room problems that we've heard mentioned, just kind of I don't even really know how you can really describe it other than that. But it's been talked about a ton by Dave Aranda and the players, just that last year's team, there just was something missing as far as the cohesiveness in that locker room. And I think that's the biggest place that they needed to start and address. And I think they did that through the transfer portal, maybe through some of the pieces that they let go. And then the additions, of course, they brought in a lot of guys who are leaders and veteran guys who have played a lot of football. And so I think that's probably the biggest thing that we've probably seen this spring and fall is just trying to address those concerns. And then also, of course, trying to make the roster better and make sure all the pieces that they brought in fit what they're trying to do offensively and defensively. So I think ultimately that's the biggest ingredient there. And if you looked at last year's team, I mean, how many close games that they had? I mean, you could look back and just say, hey, maybe if the locker room had been fixed during the season or if they were able to just kind of come together as a team down the stretch, I mean, they could have been playing for a Big 12 title. And that's kind of what we saw late in the season. When November came around, they won that game at Oklahoma. And if they had won out, they controlled their own destiny. And of course, they stumbled down the stretch. But in general, they were right there. It just was a few things here and there that were just missing from last year's team. And I think they've corrected those this offseason.
Is there something that you still are unsure about or from the standpoint of you're not quite positive that they've fully addressed it or that it's going to be miles better than maybe it was last year? Is there anything that's still kind of a burning question in your mind as far as a group or a side of the ball or performance, what have you?
I think this team still has quite a few question marks. And I mean, just because I can sit here and say that what I've seen from Blake Shapen is really positive and that, things look really good and everything the coaches have said have been positive. But, when you get in the heat of a game, is he going to be able to thrive in those clutch moments? We'll see. We've seen him do it in the past in the Big 12 championship, but we've also seen, at times he came up short a couple times last year. And it wasn't all his fault, obviously. The receivers and even sometimes the offensive line as well were inconsistent. But obviously, most people are going to put it all on the quarterback. And so Blake Shapen does need to play better and take a big step forward this upcoming season. So that's one part of it. I think the other part is more so just the idea of the transfer portal, right? Because you look at the transfer portal, you look at all the additions that Baylor has, and that's great. You look at them and you see that they're perfect fits at some positions for Baylor. But these things still have to come together, right? It's not like you're going to hit 100% in the transfer portal, but you got to be pretty close because any guy that you bring in the transfer portal is taking up a spot from someone already on the roster, someone maybe no longer on the roster. So I think that's the other part of it. It's the quarterback play, making sure that goes from middle of the pack to maybe that upper echelon top 5 type range, and then it's the transfers. Do they all gel cohesively, and does everything come together for them? A lot of them their first year at Baylor.
So would it be helpful, although everybody usually, well, not everybody, based on attrition and injuries, that you play somebody a little bit later in the year, but how intriguing is it they get Utah in week 2, Cam Rising or not? And we know how good they have been, but how much does that kind of give you a barometer? And then you turn around and a couple of games after that, here comes Texas with all of what they people think about them.
I mean, it's pretty cool, right? Because I think everyone in the nation and everyone who covers Baylor and Baylor fans as well, you're going to know how good this team is after week 4. I mean, you're point blank. If they're 3-1 or they're 4-0, I mean, you got to be feeling pretty good about what Baylor could be for the rest of the season. But if they start off 2-2, you're obviously going to have some question marks. Now, one thing I will say about that is if they do start 2-2, and let's say Texas and Utah are both undefeated, I mean, those aren't bad losses, right? And it's not panic time. But I will say, 2-2, I think would be a little frustrating for Baylor, and I think it would be for the fans as well. So yeah, I mean, it gives you a nice barometer early in the season. You get both of them at home as well, so you feel like you got to protect home field advantage, which was something they didn't do a great job of last year. And I know Dave Rand and the staff really want to correct that this season.
In fact, there's a comment that we'll have in a minute, a little bit later on, about that from today's media session.
Well, look, 3-1 or 4-0 out of those first four, Grayson, and I think, I mean, obviously all bets are off when it comes to what this team might have been able to shake off from a year ago.
Oh, definitely. I mean, if they start 4-0 with a win over Texas, you're probably looking at them as, I think a lot of people would classify Baylor as the favorite to make it to the Big 12 championship at that point, right? Because you already have a win over the team that's the favorite going into the season. And then you look at their schedule going forward, and they still would have a lot more home games on the slate as well. And then as far as if you're able to beat Utah as well during that span, and you have a win over Texas, I mean, Baylor would probably be hovering between 10 and 15 in the rankings as well. So expectations would certainly get higher if you're 4-0. And if you're 3-1, you're squarely a top 25 team as well. So the expectations will still be there if you start 3-1, which again, I believe they should start at least 3-1. You got to take advantage of these type of opportunities, especially at home.
Is the cornerback from Utah State on campus yet? And if he is, what is his status? Is it Johnny Carter?
Yes, Johnny Carter. So everything I've heard is that he has arrived. He was he posted on his Instagram story as well. So it does look like he is in Waco at this time. But I think there's still some things that have to be sorted out. The transfer portal, we've talked about this. It can sometimes take a couple days. It can sometimes, be the next day. Like Justin Sambu, the signee from Maine, he obviously arrived in Waco and then he was practicing within 2 days of arriving. That hasn't quite happened for Ajani yet, but I do believe that will happen in the next few days, probably.
Grayson Grundhoefer, Sic'Em365.com and 365 Sports, every Friday with us on this particular show. So, what is, in your opinion, the biggest unknown with this team? Is it the youth in the secondary? Is it something else? What is the biggest unknown to you?
I think it's definitely the secondary. And, I mean, you mentioned it right there. And I think that's the position that you have to look at because, you're still waiting on making sure everything is figured out with Johnny Carter. But more so on that, when he does arrive, you're looking at, about 2 weeks for him to kind of just be ready to go out there and play game one against Texas State. That's a lot to ask for, I feel like, even though he's an older guy, should be ready to go. But then the other cornerbacks, I mean, there's a lot of questions. Isaiah Dunston comes over from Miami, and he was good in the spring. I wouldn't say he was great. He never took over a starting job immediately when he got on campus. And then you have some older guys like Chateau Reed and Tevin Williams who are also doing well, but we haven't seen them really play at a high level consistently. So a lot of questions at corner. And then safety, also in the secondary, is really the only position that Baylor didn't address through the transfer portal this offseason. And I think a lot of people had questions as to why that was, but it's because they feel confident in, the combo of Devin Lemire, Devin Bobby, and then you have Corey Gordon and Bryson Jackson at star, and then Alfonso Allen as well. And I think they feel really good about that core, but I do have concerns about the depth if they do have injuries at the position. And then I also have concerns just with Corey Gordon and Devin Bobby being young guys. Are they really going to be able to play at a super consistent and high level all season long? I think that's a big question that everyone still has to have, even though I do think it's a very talented group who the coaches have clearly shown a lot of trust in.
All right, Grayson, thank you very much. Have a great weekend. Grayson Grundhoefer, 365 Sports, with us on Baylor as they